The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air as Mia wiped down table 12 for the third time that evening. Her feet ached in the worn-out sneakers she'd been wearing for 6 months now, but she couldn't afford new ones. Not when every penny went toward her family's mounting bills. At 24, Mia had dreams that seemed as distant as the stars. She glanced at the beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner of Romano's Italian restaurant, its black surface gleaming under the warm lights. That piano had been calling to her for months, but she'd never dared to touch it. It wasn't meant for someone like her, a waitress who barely made ends meet. The restaurant was busy tonight, filled with well-dressed people laughing over expensive wine and perfectly plated pasta. Mia moved between tables with practiced grace, taking orders and serving food with a smile that hid her exhaustion. She'd been working double shifts for 3 months straight, picking up every extra hour she could get. Her manager, Tony, was understanding about her situation. He knew about her father's illness and how the medical bills had crushed their family financially. What he didn't know was that Mia had once been a music student at one of the most prestigious schools in the country. She'd given up that life 2 years ago when her father was diagnosed with a rare heart condition that required expensive treatment. The piano in the corner wasn't just furniture to Mia. Every time she walked past it, memories flooded back. She remembered the feel of ivory keys under her fingers, the way music could transport her to another world, the dreams she'd once had of performing on stage. But those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone who didn't have to worry about rent money or medical bills. Tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the candlelight flickered across the piano's surface, or maybe it was the exhaustion making her emotional. As she served a young couple their dessert, she caught herself staring at the instrument again. Her fingers actually twitched, remembering chord progressions she hadn't played in years. The evening rush was beginning to slow down when she noticed him. A tall man in an expensive suit had taken a table near the piano. He wasn't like the usual customers. There was something commanding about his presence that made people turn and look. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his watch probably cost more than Mia made in a year. He was with 3 other people, all dressed in business attire, all speaking in hushed tones about deals and investments. Mia had served plenty of wealthy customers before, but this man was different. When she approached his table, he looked directly at her with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her cheerful waitress mask. "Good evening," she said, pulling out her notepad. "Can I start you off with some drinks tonight?" The man smiled, and it wasn't the polite, distant smile she usually got from customers. It was genuine, almost warm. "Actually, I'd like to ask you something first. How long have you been working here?" The question caught her off guard. "About 8 months now," she replied, wondering where this was going. "And in all that time, have you ever seen anyone play that piano?" He nodded toward the corner where the grand piano sat. Mia's heart skipped a beat. "No, sir. It's mostly decorative, I think. Mr. Romano, the owner, says it belonged to his grandmother." The man's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Shame to let such a beautiful instrument go unused. Do you play?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. She forced herself to keep smiling. "Oh no, I wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that." It was a lie, and somehow, looking into his perceptive eyes, she felt like he might know it. But admitting the truth would open doors she'd firmly closed 2 years ago. It would mean acknowledging the dreams she'd buried, the talent she'd abandoned, the life she'd given up. "Interesting," the man said, still studying her face. "You have musician's hands." Mia looked down at her hands, surprised. They were clean but rough from work, with short nails and a small scar on her thumb from a kitchen accident. She'd never thought of them as musician's hands anymore. "I think you're mistaken, sir," she said quietly. "Now, about those drinks?" The man ordered wine for his table, but Mia could feel his eyes following her as she moved around the restaurant. It made her nervous and excited at the same time. She hadn't felt this observed, this seen in years. As she worked, her mind kept drifting back to the conversation. Musician's hands. She remembered her old piano teacher saying the same thing when she was 16. Mrs. Chen had told her she had a gift, that her fingers were made for music. But gifts didn't pay medical bills or keep families afloat. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just a few tables finishing their meals. Mia was cleaning glasses behind the bar when she heard it. Someone was talking about the piano again. The wealthy man was speaking to his companions, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "It's such a waste," he was saying. "A beautiful instrument like that sitting silent. Music is meant to be shared, don't you think?" One of his companions laughed. "You and your dramatic ideas, David. Not everything needs to be turned into a performance." David. So that was his name. Mia tried not to listen, but something about the way he talked about music made her chest tight with longing. "You don't understand," David continued. "Music has power. It can change lives, heal hearts, bring people together. That piano is practically begging to be played." Mia's hands trembled as she dried a wine glass. She knew exactly what he meant. Music had been her escape, her joy, her purpose. It had been the language she spoke when words weren't enough. Giving it up had been like losing a part of herself. The last customers were leaving now, and Mia began her closing routine. She stacked chairs, wiped tables, and tried not to look at the piano. But as she moved around the dining room, she became aware that David was watching her again. He'd paid his bill but hadn't left with his friends. "Excuse me," he said as she passed his table. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem sad tonight." The observation was so unexpected and accurate that Mia almost dropped the tray she was carrying. "I'm fine, sir. Just tired." "Are you?" David stood up and she realized he was even taller than she'd thought. "Because I've been watching you all evening, and every time you look at that piano, you get this expression on your face, like you're seeing an old friend you can't talk to." Mia's defenses crumbled slightly. This stranger had seen something in one evening that her co-workers hadn't noticed in months. "It's a beautiful piano," she said carefully. "It is," David agreed, "but I think there's more to it than that." For a moment they stood in silence, the empty restaurant around them filled only with the soft music from the overhead speakers. Mia felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff and this man was asking her to jump. "I should finish closing up," she said finally. David nodded, but he didn't move toward the door. Instead, he walked over to the piano and ran his hand along its polished surface. "Such a shame," he murmured, loud enough for her to hear. "All this beauty, all this potential, just sitting here unused." Mia knew he wasn't just talking about the piano anymore. The next evening, Mia arrived at work hoping she wouldn't see David again. Their conversation had stirred up feelings she'd worked hard to bury, and she spent most of the night tossing and turning, thinking about music and dreams she couldn't afford to chase. But there he was, sitting at the same table near the piano, this time alone. He was reading something on his phone, occasionally glancing up at the instrument in the corner. When he saw Mia, he smiled that same genuine smile from the night before. "Good evening, Mia," he said as she approached his table. She was surprised he remembered her name. Most customers didn't bother. "Good evening, Mr. David." Just David. He set his phone aside and gave her his full attention. "How are you feeling today?" It was such a simple question, but the way he asked it made it seem like he really wanted to know. Mia wasn't used to customers treating her like a real person with real feelings. "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Are you dining alone tonight?" "I am. Sometimes it's nice to have a quiet meal and think." David looked around the restaurant, which was busier than usual for a Saturday night. "Though I have to say, this place has excellent atmosphere. There's something special about it." Mia followed his gaze. Romano's really was beautiful in the evening light, the warm lighting, the soft music, the smell of fresh bread and herbs. And yes, the piano that dominated one corner of the room like a sleeping giant. Mr. Romano's grandmother was a music teacher, Mia found herself saying. She used to give lessons on that piano back in Italy before the family moved here. "Ah," David said, his eyes lighting up. "So it has history. That makes it even more tragic that it sits silent." There was something in his tone that made Mia look at him more carefully. "Are you a musician?" David laughed. "Me? No. I can barely hum a tune without going off key. But I appreciate music. I believe it's one of the most powerful forces in the world." As Mia took his order, she noticed other customers starting to arrive. A couple celebrating their anniversary took a table near the window. A group of friends were laughing loudly at a corner booth. An elderly man sat alone, reading a book while he waited for his meal. The evening progressed normally until around 8 o'clock, when David did something unexpected. He stood up and walked over to the piano, running his fingers along its surface, like he had the night before. "Excuse me?" He called out to the room in general. His voice was confident, commanding attention without being loud. "I hope you don't mind the interruption." The restaurant gradually grew quiet as people turned to look at him. Mia, who was serving bread to table 6, felt her stomach drop. What was he doing? "I've been coming to this wonderful restaurant for a few weeks now," David continued. "And every time I see this beautiful piano, I wonder why no one ever plays it. Such a magnificent instrument deserves to be heard." Mr. Romano emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked curious but not upset. David was clearly someone who commanded respect. "The piano belonged to my grandmother," Mr. Romano said with his thick Italian accent. "She was a wonderful player, but these days nobody plays the old songs anymore." David nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I mean. We're surrounded by beauty that goes unappreciated." He looked around the room, making eye contact with several diners. "I have a proposition for everyone here tonight." Mia's heart was pounding now. She had a terrible feeling about where this was going. "I'm willing to bet anyone in this room $10,000, David announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant, "that there isn't a single person here who can play this piano well enough to move us to tears." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. $10,000 was more money than most people made in months. Mia felt dizzy. That amount could solve so many of her family's problems. "Now wait," called out a man from the anniversary table. "That's not fair. Most of us aren't musicians." David smiled. "Exactly my point. We assume we know people's talents, based on their jobs or appearance. But hidden gifts are everywhere. They just need the right moment to shine." His eyes found Mia across the room, and she felt like a deer caught in headlights. Surely he wasn't thinking. He couldn't possibly. "No, take our lovely waitress Mia here," David continued, and every head in the restaurant turned to look at her. "She serves us with such grace and kindness every night. But I suspect there's more to her story than we know." Mia's face burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to run to the kitchen and hide. But something in David's eyes held her, frozen in place. "Sir, I really don't think—" she started to say. "Just hear me out," David interrupted gently. "Last night I watched you look at this piano and I saw something special. Recognition, longing, love." He paused dramatically. "Those aren't the expressions of someone who's never touched piano keys." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even Mr. Romano was listening intently, his eyes moving between David and Mia like he was watching a tennis match. "I don't play piano," Mia said quietly, but her voice shook as she said it. David stepped closer to her. "Mia, I've made my fortune by reading people, by seeing potential that others miss. And right now I'm seeing someone who's hiding a beautiful gift from the world. But I can't or won't." David's voice was kind but challenging. "There's a difference." An older woman at table 4 spoke up. "Oh, come on, dear. If you can play, why not give it a try? $10,000 would change anyone's life." Other customers began to murmur agreement. The anniversary couple was smiling encouragingly. Even the elderly man with the book had looked up to watch the drama unfold. Mia felt trapped. Every eye in the restaurant was on her, and David's challenge hung in the air like a dare she couldn't ignore. Her hands were trembling, and she could feel sweat on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "I haven't played in 2 years," she whispered, barely audible. But David heard her. His smile grew wider. "Ah, so you do play." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. Once the words were out, she couldn't take them back. The secret she'd guarded so carefully was exposed. I used to, she corrected quickly. But that was a long time ago. I'm not good enough for something like this. Let us be the judge of that, David said. What do you say, everyone? Should we give Mia a chance to show us what she can do? The restaurant erupted in encouraging calls. Come on, try it. What have you got to lose? We believe in you, Mr. Romano walked over and put a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. My grandmother always said the piano knows when it's loved, he said softly. Maybe it's time someone loved it again. Mia looked around at all the expectant faces. These strangers were cheering for her, believing in her when she'd stopped believing in herself long ago. David's $10,000 bet suddenly seemed less important than the possibility of touching music again, even for just one song. Don't know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What if I mess up? David's expression grew serious. Mia, the only real failure is never trying at all, and something tells me you've been failing yourself for too long. His words hit her like a physical blow because they were true. She had been failing herself, denying the part of her that made her feel most alive. One song, she heard herself saying. Just one. Mia's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward the piano. Each step seemed to take forever, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The entire restaurant was watching her, and she wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The piano bench felt cold when she sat down. She lifted the lid that covered the keys, and the familiar black and white pattern stared back at her like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. Take your time, dear, called out the older woman from table 4. We're not going anywhere. Mia closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. She thought about the last time she'd played piano. It was 2 years ago, the night before she'd packed up her things and left music school. Forever. She'd played for hours that night, pouring all her sadness and fear into the keys, saying goodbye to the only life she'd ever wanted. When she opened her eyes, she caught sight of David watching her intently. There was something in his expression that surprised her. It wasn't the look of someone waiting to be entertained. It was the look of someone who truly believed in her. What should I play? She asked, her voice barely audible. Whatever speaks to your heart, David replied. The piano will tell you. Mia looked down at the keys again. Her music teacher used to say the same thing. Let the music choose you, Mrs. Chen would tell her students. Don't think so much, just feel. Slowly, carefully, Mia placed her fingers on the keys. She started with a simple C major scale, just to feel the touch of the piano. The sound that came out was rich and warm, filling the restaurant with its voice. She'd forgotten how beautiful a well-tuned piano could sound. The scale felt good under her fingers, familiar and comforting. She moved into a few chords, testing the piano's response. Each note seemed to awaken something inside her that had been sleeping for 2 years. Then, without really deciding to, she began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was the piece she'd been working on when she left school, the one she'd planned to perform for her senior recital. Her fingers remembered the melody as if she'd played it yesterday. The first few bars were tentative, careful. She was still thinking too much, still worried about making mistakes. But as the familiar melody flowed from her fingers, something magical began to happen. The restaurant around her seemed to fade away. The watching faces, the pressure, the fear, all of it melted into the background. There was only Mia and the music. Her fingers found their confidence, dancing across the keys with growing assurance. The melody soared and dipped, telling a story, without words. This was why she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. It was a language that could express feelings too deep for words. As she played, memories flooded back. She remembered being 7 years old, sitting on her grandmother's lap while they played simple songs together. She remembered her first recital, at age 12, wearing a white dress and shaking with nerves until the music took over. She remembered countless hours of practice, the joy of mastering a difficult passage, the pure happiness of creating something beautiful. But the music also carried her pain, the heartbreak of leaving school, the guilt of abandoning her dreams, the exhaustion of working endless shifts to pay bills that never seemed to get smaller. All of it poured through her fingers into the piano, transforming her suffering into something beautiful. The restaurant was completely silent except for the piano. Mia was vaguely aware that people had stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped moving. Even the kitchen staff had grown quiet, but she was too lost in the music to really notice. The nocturne built to its emotional climax, and Mia felt tears running down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from sadness, exactly. It was more like release, like she was finally breathing after holding her breath for 2 years. This was who she really was. This was what she was meant to do. Her fingers moved through the complex passages, with muscle memory that hadn't faded despite the years away. The piano responded to her touch like it had been waiting for her. Every note was perfect, every phrase shaped with emotion and skill that comes from years of training and natural talent. As the piece moved toward its gentle conclusion, Mia became aware of something amazing. Someone in the restaurant was crying. She could hear soft sniffles and the sound of someone trying to compose themselves. Then she heard another person and another. The music was doing what David had challenged it to do. It was moving people to tears. The final notes of the nocturne hung in the air like dewdrops, pure and crystalline. Mia played the last chord and let it fade naturally, her hand still resting on the keys. For a moment, the restaurant was completely silent. Then the applause began. It started with David, who was openly crying as he clapped. The older woman from table 4 joined in, tears streaming down her face. The anniversary couple was holding hands and clapping with their free hands. Even Mr. Romano was wiping his eyes with his apron while he applauded. But it wasn't just polite restaurant applause. People were standing up, calling out, "Bravo," and "Beautiful." The elderly man with the book was shaking his head in amazement. A young mother at the corner table was crying while her children looked at her in confusion. Mia sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. She'd forgotten what it felt like to share music with people, to see how it could touch their hearts and change their mood. She'd forgotten the pure joy of connecting with an audience through sound. "That was incredible," David said, walking over to the piano. His voice was thick with emotion. "I knew you had talent, but that was extraordinary." Other customers began approaching the piano, all wanting to tell Mia how her music had affected them. "You made me think of my late husband," the older woman said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "He used to love Chopin." "I haven't been moved like that by music in years," said the anniversary husband. "Thank you for sharing that with us." Even the young mother came over, still emotional. "My daughter is learning piano," she said. "I'm going to tell her about you. You've reminded me why music matters." Mr. Romano was beaming with pride as if Mia were his own daughter. "My grandmother would have loved hearing her piano played like that," he said. "You brought it back to life." Mia was overwhelmed by the flood of compliments and gratitude. She'd expected to play one song and sit back down, but instead she'd created a moment that clearly meant something special to everyone in the room. David raised his hand for attention. "I think it's safe to say," he announced with a grin, "that I've lost my bet." That performance moved everyone in this room to tears, including me. The restaurant erupted in laughter and more applause, but Mia barely heard it. She was still processing what had just happened. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. She felt complete. "The $10,000 is yours," David said quietly, so only she could hear. "You've more than earned it." But Mia was staring at her hands still resting on the piano keys. Something had changed in those few minutes of music. Something important. She looked up at David with wonder in her eyes. "I'd forgotten," she whispered. "I'd completely forgotten how it feels to really be alive." Mia was still sitting at the piano trying to process what had just happened, when she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. It was slow clapping, coming from the back of the restaurant. But this wasn't the enthusiastic applause from the other customers. This was different, familiar. She turned around slowly and her heart nearly stopped. There, sitting in the darkest corner booth, was her father. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him 3 weeks ago, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of pain and sleepless nights. But he was smiling through his tears, clapping with hands that shook slightly from his medication. "Dad?" Mia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Her father, Robert, stood up slowly, using the table for support. The other customers had noticed him now, sensing that something important was happening. The celebration atmosphere grew quiet as people realized they were witnessing something deeply personal. "I couldn't miss this," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "Mrs. Patterson from next door called me. She said she saw you through the window sitting at a piano. I didn't believe her at first." Mia felt her world spinning. Her father wasn't supposed to be out of the house, especially not at night. His doctor had been very clear about rest and avoiding stress. "Dad, you should be home, your heart—" "My heart is fine right now," Robert interrupted, walking slowly toward the piano. "Better than it's been in months, actually. Do you know why?" Mia shook her head, unable to speak. "Because I just watched my daughter do what she was born to do," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger. "I just saw you become yourself again." The restaurant was completely silent now. Even David had stepped back, sensing this was a private moment between father and daughter. But Robert didn't seem to mind the audience. If anything, he seemed proud to have witnesses to what he was about to say. "Mia, I need to tell you something," Robert said, reaching the piano. "Something I should have told you 2 years ago." "Dad, please. Not here. Not now." Mia was mortified that her personal life was being displayed in front of strangers, including David with his $10,000 bet. But Robert wasn't backing down. "No, it has to be now. Because I've been carrying this guilt for too long, and after hearing you play—" He paused, wiping his eyes. "After hearing you play, I realize I almost destroyed the most beautiful thing in the world." "What are you talking about?" Mia asked, though part of her was afraid to know. Robert sat down heavily on the chair that Mr. Romano had quietly brought over. "When you came home from school 2 years ago, when you said you were dropping out to take care of me and help with the medical bills, do you remember what I said?" Mia nodded. "You said you understood. You said family comes first." "I lied," Robert said simply. "I didn't understand at all. I was terrified and in pain and not thinking clearly, but I should have fought you on it. I should have made you stay in school." The older woman from table 4 had moved closer, openly listening now. Tears were running down her cheeks as she watched the father-daughter conversation unfold. "Dad, you were sick. You needed me." "No," Robert said firmly. "I needed you to be happy. I needed you to become the musician you were meant to be. Instead, I let you sacrifice everything for me, and I've hated myself for it every single day since." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. "Do you know what this is?" Mia looked at the envelope, confused. It was addressed to her from her old music school, but it had been opened. "I don't understand. Where did you get that?" "It came 6 months ago," Robert said. "Your scholarship advisor sent it. Apparently they've been holding your spot, hoping you'd come back. They even arranged a special fund to help with your expenses." Mia felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "What?" "They never gave up on you," Robert continued. "Even when you gave up on yourself. This letter is offering you a full ride to finish your degree plus a living stipend. They want you back, Mia. They never stopped wanting you back." The envelope shook in Mia's hands as she opened it. The letter inside was exactly what her father had described. The music department chair had written personally, expressing how much they missed her talent and dedication. They were offering her everything she'd ever dreamed of. "But why didn't you show me this?" Mia asked, her voice breaking. Robert's face crumpled with guilt. "Because I was selfish. Because I was scared of being alone. Because I thought I needed you more than the world needed your music." He looked around the restaurant at all the faces still affected by her performance. "But after tonight I realize how wrong I was. The world does need your music, and more importantly, you need it. David, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "If I may," he said gently, "I think there's something else your father wants to tell you." Robert looked surprised that David had spoken, but then nodded. "He's right, there's more." Mia couldn't imagine what else there could be. Her mind was already reeling from the scholarship news. "I've been working extra shifts," Robert said. "Against doctor's orders, I know, but I've been saving money, every penny I could spare." He pulled out another envelope, this one thick with cash. "I was going to surprise you tonight. I have enough. Saved to cover your first semester's living expenses, even without the scholarship." "Dad, no, you can't work extra shifts. My heart is strong enough to work for my daughter's dreams," Robert said. "What it can't handle is watching you waste your talent waiting tables when you should be on stage." The young mother who had approached earlier was crying again. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered to her husband. Mr. Romano had been listening from behind the bar, and now he came forward. "If I may say something," he said with his thick accent. "I have been watching this young lady for months. She is a good worker, very reliable. But tonight I see who she really is." He turned to address the whole restaurant. "My grandmother, she always say that music is gift from God. When someone has this gift, it is sin to waste it." He looked directly at Mia. "You have gift, young lady. Big gift. You must use it." David nodded in agreement. "Which brings me to my own confession," he said. "I didn't just randomly notice your talent, Mia. I've been coming here for weeks watching you because someone told me about you." "What do you mean?" Mia asked. "Your old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, she's a friend of mine. She's been worried about you ever since you left school. She asked me to check on you, maybe see if I could help." Mia's jaw dropped. "Mrs. Chen sent you?" "She never stopped believing in you," David said. "And after tonight I understand why. That performance wasn't just beautiful music. It was a calling. It was proof that some people are born to create beauty in this world." The anniversary couple had been whispering to each other, and now the husband stood up. "We'd like to contribute to your education fund," he announced. "We own a small business, and we believe in supporting artists." "So would we," called out another customer. "What you just did for us, the way you made us feel, that's worth supporting." One by one, other customers began offering to help. The elderly man with the book turned out to be a retired music professor who offered to give her additional lessons. The young mother wanted to hire her to teach her daughter. Mia looked around the restaurant in amazement. An hour ago, she was just a waitress struggling to pay bills. Now she was surrounded by people who wanted to help her chase her dreams. But the most important person was her father, who was looking at her with more pride and love than she'd ever seen in his eyes. "So, what do you say, sweetheart?" Robert asked. "Ready to go back to school and show the world what you can do?" Mia stared at her father, then at the scholarship letter in her hands, then at all the faces around her. The weight of the moment felt enormous. 2 years ago, she'd made the hardest decision of her life by leaving music school. Now she was being asked to make another life-changing choice, but this time in front of a room full of strangers who had become invested in her story. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can do it." The restaurant was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for her answer. "What do you mean?" her father asked gently. "Of course you can do it, you just proved it to everyone here. But what about your medical bills? What about the rent? What about—" "Stop," Robert interrupted, his voice firm but loving. "Stop making excuses for other people's problems. You're 24 years old, Mia. When I was your age, I was already married and had a job, but I'd never done anything that made me feel truly alive. You have that chance right now." David stepped closer to the piano. "Mia, can I tell you something? I've been successful in business for over 20 years. I've made more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, but I've never, ever created anything as beautiful as what you just shared with us." The older woman from table 4 nodded enthusiastically. "That's right, dear. Money comes and goes, but talent like yours is forever. But I'm scared, Mia admitted, and saying it out loud made her feel both vulnerable and relieved. What if I'm not good enough anymore? What if I've forgotten too much? What if I fail? The young mother who had been listening stepped forward. Can I tell you something? My daughter started piano lessons last year and she was so excited at first. But then she heard some older kids playing at a recital and she came home crying. She said she'd never be that good, so why bother trying? Mia looked at the woman, wondering where this was going. I told her the same thing I'm going to tell you, the mother continued. The only way to guarantee failure is to never try. Those kids she heard playing, they all started where she is now. The only difference is they kept going. Mr. Romano, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. You know what my grandmother used to say? She'd say, when God gives you gift, you don't give it back. You share it with world. The retired music professor who had been reading in the corner stood up and walked over. Young lady, I taught piano for 43 years before I retired. I can spot real talent from across a room, and what you have is extraordinary. But more than that, you have something that can't be taught. What's that? Mia asked. Heart, the professor said simply. Technical skill can be learned by anyone, willing to practice. But the ability to make people feel something through music? That's a gift from heaven, and you, my dear, made every person in this room feel something tonight. Mia looked around at all the faces surrounding her. These weren't just customers anymore. Somehow, in the space of one evening, they'd become supporters, cheerleaders, believers in her dreams. But what about you, Dad? She asked, turning back. To her father, I can't just leave you alone to deal with everything. Robert smiled, and for the first time in months it was a smile without any sadness behind it. Sweetheart, do you want to know what the worst part of being sick has been? It wasn't the pain or the treatments or even the fear. It was watching my daughter give up her dreams because of me. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Every morning when you left for work here, I died a little inside. Every time I saw you look at a piano or heard music on the radio and saw that expression on your face, I hated myself for letting you sacrifice everything. Tears were flowing freely down Mia's cheeks now. I never wanted you to feel that way. No, you didn't. That's what makes you such a good daughter. But good daughters don't have to sacrifice their entire lives for their parents. Good daughters chase their dreams and make their parents proud by becoming who they're meant to be. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Mia, I have a proposition for you. My company has a scholarship program for talented individuals pursuing their dreams. We'd like to sponsor your education completely, including living expenses. Mia stared at the card in shock. But you already gave me $10,000 from the bet. I can't accept more than that. The bet was just to get you to play, David said with a grin. This is business. I invest in potential, and you, my dear, have more potential than anyone I've met in years. The anniversary couple had been whispering to each other again, and now the wife spoke up. We've decided something too. We'd like to offer you a job performing at our daughter's wedding next month. It's not much, but it would be good practice for getting back into performance. And I meant what I said about piano lessons for my daughter, the young mother added. I'll pay you well, and it would help you get comfortable teaching while you're in school. One by one, other customers began making offers. The elderly man wanted to hire her for his wife's birthday party. A businessman at the corner table asked if she'd be interested in playing at corporate events. Even Mr. Romano had an idea. You know what? Mr. Romano said, his eyes bright with excitement. What if you play here on weekend evenings while you're in school? Not as waitress, but as pianist. People come for dinner and music like in the old country. I pay you good money and you get practice performing. Mia felt overwhelmed by the flood of opportunities. An hour ago, her biggest worry was whether she could pay rent this month. Now people were offering her jobs, sponsorships, and chances to build a real career in music. This is all happening so fast, she said, looking around at everyone's eager faces. Sometimes life happens fast, her father said. Sometimes you get one moment, one chance to change everything. This is your moment, Mia. David nodded in agreement. I've learned that the biggest regrets in life come from chances we didn't take. not chances we did. What's the worst that could happen if you try? You might fail and have to start over. But what's the worst that happens if you don't try? I stay exactly where I am, Mia said quietly. Exactly. And after what we all witnessed tonight, staying where you are would be a tragedy for the whole world. Mia stood up from the piano bench and walked to the center of the restaurant. She looked around at all the faces watching her hopefully. These strangers had shown her more support in one evening than she'd felt in 2 years. Okay, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Okay, I'll do it. I'll go back to school. I'll chase my dreams again. The restaurant erupted in cheers and applause. People were hugging each other like they'd all won the lottery together. Her father was crying and laughing at the same time, and even Mr. Romano was wiping tears from his eyes. But the most amazing part was what happened next. Without anyone asking, without any planning, people began sharing their own stories of dreams they'd given up or were afraid to chase. The businessman talked about wanting to write a novel. The young mother admitted she'd always wanted to learn to paint. The elderly man confessed he'd dreamed of traveling the world. Somehow Mia's courage to chase her dreams again had given everyone permission to think about their own possibilities. 6 months later, Mia was back in music school, playing better than she ever had before. She performed at Romano's every weekend to packed crowds. She taught piano lessons to children and adults who'd been inspired by her story. And most importantly, her father was healthier and happier than he'd been in years, proud to tell everyone about his daughter, the pianist. Sometimes the best decisions are the scariest ones. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith and trust that the net will appear. And sometimes one moment of courage can change not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. The piano at Romano's never sat silent again.